Okay, thank you all for attending. I thought with this graveyard slot there'd be about 10 people, so I've been really chilled out, and now I don't feel quite so chilled. So thank you for that. So if I stumble over my words, you know why. So I'm going to talk about backlogs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I hope it meets expectations. Just a little bit about myself. Oh, sorry about the blurry logo there. One thing I forgot to change. I have co-authored a book on Agile and Business Analysis, which really talks about a lot of this stuff. So if you are interested, some of these things have been pulled out of some of those chapters. I work for CMC Partnership. They're a very small consultancy firm, and we help organisations, mostly in the public sector, but also the private sector, with their transformational journeys. And that's what we do. The BCS logo's in there is because I'm a subject matter expert with the British Computer Society. In business analysis, I'm one of their examiners for the diploma in business analysis, and I help them with a lot of their syllabus and so forth. So I always add that in. That's enough about me. What I'm going to talk about, though, is these 4 things, and it's just 4 things. I'm hoping that I will finish on time, or I might be early. I've never actually delivered this whole presentation as it is before, so we'll just see how it goes. We'll see how the times feel. There's still more people coming in. Feel free to come in and sit on the floor. You can cross your legs at the front here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about these 4 areas, and for each area, I'm hopefully going to pull out some of the good things, some things that might be bad, or in my view. They might not be bad in your view. So I think that's important to note. This is my opinion on what I think is good practice, what I've seen. And a lot of this comes from my experience of looking at backlogs. Now, I've been working in this industry for about 25 years. Yeah, I know. I probably only look like it should be about 10. But nearly 30 years, actually. And when I look at backlogs, I see some patterns. And that's what I'm sort of giving you the observation about the work I've done, working with development teams, working at a program level as well, so working at big programs, and I see the same patterns evolving. So this is based on my observation and what I think. So the first one, using goals to improve backlogs. I think goals are really important. Now, we can talk about goals in terms of outcomes. You could think about a goal as what is the business trying to achieve, what is the outcome, but I use the term goals. That's what we're thinking about. What is it the customer, the end goal for the organisation, for the client that they're trying to achieve? Now, goals are really important for us as individuals and actually in business. We set goals all the time. If you were in I suppose the England team had a goal to win on Wednesday. They didn't achieve their goal, but I can guarantee that during that game, they didn't plan out exactly what was going to happen. They didn't say that in the first half we'll have 46% possession and we'd have scored a goal. That wasn't their aim was to score goals. And they're adjusting and adapting all the way through that. Their end goal was to win, but they didn't plan it out, did they? If you're working with life coaches, I don't know if any of you have worked with life coaches, but you get these sort of things. They say, set your goals of what you want to achieve with your life. And then they tell you to work backwards. And then they say, well, work backwards and then think about where you're going. And because the journey to achieving the goal is more important sometimes than the ultimate goal. So for instance, you might start out on this life-changing experience, and you might start on step 1 and actually realize that the original goal you set is now not right. But if you didn't set the goal, you'd never have got to that next stage. So goals are really important for us. But goals need to be adaptable. We can't be setting goals and then saying we can only achieve that goal. Setting goals enables us to control the direction of the work, if you think about it from a project perspective. And they're also benchmarks, aren't they, for achieving success. When I work with a lot of deputy directors or seniors within organisations, especially at a programme level, as a business analyst, the one thing they often say to me is, what value are we getting from the programme? Now, how many of you heard that question when you're working on projects? Where is the value? What value have you got? Or worse still, on larger programmes, they may have been running for a year or more. They're going, I've spent all of this money. What have I got for it? Yeah, and there's a few of you nodding in here. And I think that's because we're not very good at setting these goals and we're not very good at breaking these goals down. So I want to sort of talk a little bit about how using goals and decomposing goals is really important in order to answer those questions. If we just set a high-level project goal, it can force us into a waterfall approach. Now, what I mean by that is if I set a goal which is to climb Mount Everest, and I break that goal down into a set of tasks all relating to me getting up Mount Everest, I've almost now precluded the opportunity for me to be iterative and incremental. Yet we do this all the time with our project plans. We don't plan it like a football match, do we? We don't say we'll leave them to adjust and react and think about it in real time. We think we can get those plans out from the start, and if we follow along those plans, then actually we'll get to the end result. And often we do that by keep changing the milestones back to green. I say we, I've never done it, but I've seen project managers do it. So it's keep making that everything turn green, even though it turned red and then went back to green. It's not actually adjusting or adapting, it's just massaging the figures, isn't it, often? This isn't helped a lot. What I see a lot is people go from a project goal and then they go straight down into a product backlogs, and I say product backlogs. And that product backlog is for a particular piece of technology. Now, the minute you've gone into a piece of technical functionality, you've lost sight of the business value. This gets exacerbated when you're working on programs where you've got multiple projects, because now you've got this ultimate goal. The other thing that I've seen happen in this situation is that the problem's too big. The goal is too big and nobody knows how to solve it. So after pondering around it for about 3 months, I'm being lenient, it's mostly in the public sector, it's about a year. But after pondering around this problem for a while, the easiest way they can think to get something out the door, to deliver something, is to think about where bits of the technology could be improved. Yeah? And we often call these quick wins. Okay, personally, I don't think there is such a thing as a quick win. That's just doing the easy stuff first, isn't it? That doesn't really help you address risk. It doesn't help you to fail early, fail fast. All it does is defer risk. So actually, I don't think that necessarily works. The other thing that happens in this situation is that the technology bits that you've done as quick wins then become their own projects. They become projects with a budget, and then they have their own little project thing, and that project thing is to make that technology work brilliantly. So they over-engineer it. And by the time it's actually delivered, it ends up with a load of functionality that A, can't be realized because the other bits of the technology aren't in place, or 2, the customer didn't want it anyway. So we end up wasting a lot of money because we don't think about where the goals are. So the structure that we have in these hierarchies aren't necessarily helping us if we jump straight down into product backlogs too soon. So one of the things I'm proposing here is you decompose your goals. You take a big business goal and you break your big business goal into smaller business goals. So it might be, I've got an example, but I don't want to use it here because I'm using it later, so I'll just defer my examples until later. But if I use the climbing Everest example, the ultimate goal might be to climb Everest, but I might climb a smaller mountain early on in the stages. I might think about all the things I need to climb a much smaller mountain, which might not have the same conditions. But I will learn about my equipment, I'll learn about the team will learn about each other, and in doing that, if we fail at that, then we're going to fail at Everest, right? So it allows us to think about how we can be iterative and incremental in terms of getting there, but we're still climbing the mountain, but it's just not the ultimate mountain that we want to climb. I've also heard people say to me, I can't have an iteration goal, it doesn't work. Iteration goals, in fact, my husband sat here, and that's one of his bugbears. The team will say, it doesn't make sense for us because we're so involved in the technology we're delivering that we can't have a sprint goal. But my argument to that is, if you can't be iterative and incremental and you don't know what the goals are, how are you actually being agile? Because agile is about being iterative and incremental. And to be iterative and incremental, you need to know what you're trying to achieve in those iterations and what you're trying to achieve in the increments. So I don't see how that works. It just sounds like an excuse to me. Don't split big goals into big plans. Again, that's that functional decomposition rather than goal decomposition. I think that came from Jeff Patton, that phrase. I should attribute that to him. And don't functionally decompose. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So in terms of just using goals and the idea and concepts of goals, good would be use goals or outcomes, if you prefer the term outcomes, to articulate business value, not technology. What is the business value that we're trying to achieve? Bad is don't create backlogs that define technical design, and that's having backlogs that are so wedded to technology that now you can't see where value is going to be created for the end user. And ugly, don't just straight into stories. Stories need to be refined, and you need to think about them. If you jump straight down to stories or story level, you end up with big backlogs. Big backlogs are also bad because you spend more of your time managing them than you actually do delivering any value from them. So those are also not good. So that's my first section. Leading on from that then, how do we create value stories? So how can we create stories where we're actually, know that that story is of value? And I find that this is a thing that often people struggle with. Well, you do it by actually doing goal decomposition. Now, you break down a story the same way you break down a goal. You break down the value bit, the bit that's adding the value, the bit that you're trying to achieve. If I asked you, and in fact I will ask you, just spend 2 or 3 minutes thinking about how you would break down this big goal. As an event organizer, I want to plan and execute a 10-kilometer fun run. Just have a little chat with the person next to you. I'm going to give you literally 2 minutes. Okay, can I stop you there? Hi, thank you. Thank you. Can I stop you? Woo! Enough discussion. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I probably shouldn't have done that in such a large room. But obviously there was a lot of discussion going on. I'm not going to ask you for feedback because that will just take too long. But I will ask you, how many people actually come up with things like this? Yeah? A lot of you did, didn't you? That's actually breaking it down by function, and that's a natural way for us to break down problems. We're taught to do that. It's work breakdown structure. We do that when we do planning, don't we? Think about the constituent parts. How many in the room maybe consider things such as these? My 2 colleagues at the back there. This is less often done. Now, this is iterative and incremental because this is leading you towards the ultimate goal. So it's breaking it down into smaller things. Each thing is a slice of end-to-end value. And although the very first thing might be, a small 10K run with 5 friends, it's still a fun run. It might not have achieved the ultimate result, but I might have worked out from that what the route is. I might work out whether it's a good 10K route, whether there are any obstacles on the route. So I can learn from doing that. It might be that the next time I run an event that I just set up as a Facebook event. I don't have to have any booking facilities. I can limit it to 50, and I can maybe have a few marshals on the route. And I would know that because the earlier one told me where marshals might be because we got lost, or somebody got lost on the way. So you can start to learn and evolve your understanding by doing that. And eventually you can lead. I'm sure the London Marathon didn't start off with 55,000 people in mind. And this is about being iterative and incremental, yet we seem to forget this and we go straight to functional decomposition. The problem with this is these things on their own don't add any value. And if I have a team of people set up to organise marshals and another team to find sponsors, and because the problem's so big, because it's going to be in a year's time and it's such a big thing and we've never done it before, I'll have a whole load of people just focusing on advertising events. Without understanding all of the other things that need to play into that, we end up over-engineering the advertise events, and that team becomes siloed into their way of thinking around advertising event and not thinking about the ultimate business value of what it's for. Whereas actually over here, you're doing a little bit of everything. You're doing just enough of all of these things to achieve that goal. And that's the main difference. And our stories need to be based on that. Otherwise, we lose the value the minute we decompose them. We start off with a high-level requirement, concept, idea. I don't like the term requirement. I like to think of it as concepts and ideas. And the minute you break it down, you've lost the value. Isn't it any wonder that our customers are coming back to us and saying, what am I getting for my money? I spend my time as a business analyst trying to draw those things together and show them what they're getting for their money. But this should be a lot simpler, shouldn't it? Sometimes we're talking about millions of pounds worth of money. If it was your money, you'd want to know. So, creating value stories. Decompose big goals into smaller goals. Bad. Don't split big goals into big plans. I know that was on an earlier one, but it's still in there. It's still valuable. And ugly. Don't decompose your goals functionally into work tasks, because that's what you're doing when you break them down functionally. They become into work tasks and you lose sight of the value. It's only 15 minutes in and I'm actually already at 3, so we might have plenty of time for questions. So now, this is sort of a bigger chunk of the presentation now. So how do you split stories? I talk about decomposing by a goal, but what does that actually mean in practice, and how do you go about splitting stories down? Well, we know that stories should meet this criteria, don't we? We often talk about it. How many of you are familiar with this criteria, the INVEST criteria? There's a lot of you in the room that will be familiar with this. But how many times do you break them down and actually stick to valuable to the customer? Because you didn't just now. Okay, and I think you lose that straight away, and I think we forget about that. So there are 2 things in here I think become really important. Small enough. The story needs to be small enough eventually so that it can be, delivered or implemented within a sprint, whatever length your sprint is. And it needs to be valuable to the end user. And those are the 2 things I look for in stories, because the other stuff tends to be a bit easier because people can do that. Although, arguably, you can't estimate big stories. So if you've got a big story, they're really hard to estimate. In fact, if you're struggling to estimate a story, it's probably because it's too big. Now, the whole value in doing this is not only just to retain the value and get something end-to-end out that somebody can say is of value. And by the way, value is in the eyes of the customer. Okay, only a customer or a client or an end user can tell you whether what you've delivered is of value. I could propose to you that you would get value from an Apple Watch. I could give you all the features and say it'd be so good, you get so much value from this Apple Watch. But until it's on your wrist and you're using it, day in, day out, you can't tell me whether it's valuable. So we can only detect value when actually it's in the hands of the user, not before. Everything else is proposition of value. Okay, and I think we forget about that. We talk about delivering value because we're delivering technology, but there's no value in technology. There's only value in its use. And whether that person can say, my life has been improved in some way, or I have a better experience because of it. Okay, so we need to bear that in mind when we're doing this. So I think this is really important to remember, this model, when you're actually going through splitting stories. I don't know if any of you have ever come across Alastair Coburn. Now, Alastair Coburn wrote a book many years ago called Writing Effective Use Cases. Now, some of you probably go, oh, use cases, that's so old-fashioned, we use stories. Actually, it's not, because there's some really, really good stuff in there. What he talked about was these different levels, and we've got cloud, kite, sea, and fish, okay? And he talks about stories or use cases being at different levels. Your high-level ones are the end goal, the ultimate goal, the program goal, the thing that you're aiming to achieve. That's your climbing your Everest or delivering a particular website or something. The next level down is your kite level. They're still high. They're too big. You could argue they're epics. Right? They're too big. They still need further decomposition, but they're good enough to group. It gives us a better understanding. And if I take one of those, which is serve a hot drink while I could be serving coffee, And this analogy is, I should explain this analogy. My ultimate goal might be to open a profitable cafe. Okay, now if I went straight into secure premises, get the tables and chairs, buy a £20,000 espresso machine, I could achieve all of that and realise I've got it in the wrong location. I'm not very good at this thing, and there's no people passing by. I've got no footfall. So my business could fail straight away. However, I could choose to actually break the goal down and say, why don't I start serving coffee in a park out the back of my car with flasks and milk, and just get some feedback and see how that works, and build up, maybe get one of those little caravan things, Airstream, that's probably going a bit expensive, but moving up to that goal. If all I do is serve a hot drink serving coffee and it's instant coffee, and I need to buy a flask to do that, and there are other things I need to buy to achieve that, I still have achieved a goal because I'm still getting revenue in. It might be really tiny, and you might not think, oh, it's not worth it, but actually it is worth it because I'm getting feedback. And that's the most important thing, and we lose that context when we're trying to do things in a technical project. What's interesting is Alastair Coburn says, at this point, everything above sea level is in the user space. It's of value to an end-to-end customer. They can see it as a goal, it's got value. Everything below that is below sea. In fact, there's another one called a clam. And these don't offer value in their own right. So if I asked you to think about all the things you do while you're taking a shower, I shouldn't have asked that actually, that's probably the wrong question. But just, if I were taking a shower, adjusting the temperature, there's no value in me adjusting the temperature unless I'm having a shower. It's a task. It might be something I need to do, and maybe I need to figure out how the tap works and all of those things, and it might be very technical, but it's of no value in its own right. I could argue that logging on to a system is actually of no value to an end user. I've never seen anyone go to an ATM and put their card in for no reason. I might go and check my PIN, but my point is I will be checking my PIN is correct. I don't go in and go, just want to put my PIN and get my card out, off I go. Nobody does that. Nobody logs on to a system for no reason. Yet we have big technical stories which are all about the log-on process. Why? Who's getting any value out of that? My point is your backlog should contain things at a sea level and above and not tasks, technical tasks. The tasks are the things you need to do. In fact, these tasks are the things I need to do to achieve that goal. And that goal is a decomposition of those goals. And if I have lots of these smaller goals, they add up to a bigger set of value. Does that make sense? Yet, we do this at the start, don't we? And then we wonder why our customers are coming back to us and saying, what have you delivered for my money? What have I got for my money? Okay, and that's the ultimate question, isn't it? Actually, as I've been attending talks at this conference, I've heard lots of things about value, value streams, lots of things about the customer, understanding the customer. And I was in the microservices talk before lunch. How many of you were in the microservices talk? In that talk, he made it really, really clear that you need to understand the end-to-end thread. You need to understand what the customer is doing in order to even create microservices. If you create microservices just for the sake of it, the chances are it's not going to meet what the business is trying to achieve or what the customers want to achieve. So it's not going to give you the service value. You actually lose the whole value of microservices. So this is really important stuff, even at a technical level. I don't know if any of you have seen this diagram before. It's not mine. It's come from Matrix. I quite like it, though, and I've tried to recreate it a few times, but I've decided I'll just steal it because this one works really well for me. And it comes back to the automated teller. And I often refer to people's stories being a slice of the cake. Okay, if I offer you a slice of cake, you probably want a slice of cake, no matter how thin, that contains all of the layers, including the cream and the frosting and the bottom layer of sponge. And even though it was a tiny, tiny slither of a slice, you could still tell me whether it tastes nice. If I offer you a piece of the cake or a slice of the cake and I give you just a slightly bigger piece, but it's just the bottom layer of sponge, you're probably thinking, well, that's not cake, that's just a dry bottom layer of sponge. There's no value in that. Yes, you can see it's part of a cake, but you're not getting the whole experience, are you? So we often talk about slicing stories in terms of vertical and horizontal slices. In fact, I would advocate not doing horizontal slices, but do vertical slices. So here your vertical slices cut through all of it, and that could be your architectural layers, but it's end-to-end in terms of what the business wants. And when we talked about microservices in the previous talk, it was very clear that that's what he was relating to, slices of end-to-end value that go all the way through. And it might be somebody wants to get, cash usage. Now, this gives us an opportunity to actually do some analysis. Because once we understand these vertical slices, we can say, well, which one of these should we do first? And if 90% of our customers are doing one piece of vertical slicing and 10% another, then it would make sense that we do that piece of functionality first. It allows us to prioritize a lot easier. How would you prioritize if you're doing it horizontally? How can I prioritize mainframe database over transport protocol? There's no value in it. You can't prioritize it unless you've got that business value. How is a product owner going to prioritize it without the business context and value? Context is everything here. So we really need to be thinking about having slices of the cake, and that's the value, thinking about where the value is. So here's an example I want you to just take a look at. Here's a story, very, very basic story. As a, I want to, so I can. Which part of the story is the bit that needs to be decomposed or split? Which part of the story is the actual goal of the story? The thing that the story is trying to achieve? The so I can. Who agrees with the so I can? A few of you. I would disagree. The actual thing that they're trying to do is book a hotel room. The goal of the story is to be able to book a hotel room. The justification for doing that is because they want to work in another location. If I'm breaking down the story, therefore, and I want to split that story because it's too big, then I want to split the bit which says book a hotel room. And then I might ask myself, how do I book a hotel room? And for instance, there we go. I might book it by phone, by email, through a website. Might be different websites. It might be through different Android OS. I might book one hotel room, multiple rooms. I might book a room for myself. I might bulk book. All of them are different stories, but they're all a decomposition of that one story. They're all to do with booking a hotel room. And so I might have smaller stories. Says, as a corporate customer, I want to book a hotel room for myself via the phone, via telephone call. As a corporate customer, I want to book multiple rooms through a website. You see how you can break that down now by looking at the what and the who, and it breaks it down. It's still about booking a room, and it will allow you to get early value out. If 90% of your customers are corporate customers, and 90% of them want to book through a website and book individual rooms, then that's the one you're going to go with first. That's how helping you prioritize now, because you're looking at your market. And this is where we look at persona analysis and all of these things that we need to bring into it. We can't do that if I've broken it down by technology because I've lost sight and context. Patterns then for splitting stories. Well, you can split a story by interface. So you could say, I want to do that functionality, but when you've done some analysis over it, you might decide to do it through one particular browser first and maybe an Android later. Depends on your market research. You might want to do it by user type. I want to focus on doing it for people within the UK. You might want to do it based on personas. Individuals, or depending on what your website is or what your functionality is or who your customers are, you might prioritize certain personas over other certain personas. And that guides you then into the stories you want to split first. If you split all of these stories all up front, you're going to end up with a backlog that is really, really big. I did a keynote talk at a conference called the Dream Conference in the Netherlands last year or the year before. And my talk was on lean requirements and being an agile business analysis. And the talk, somebody was promoting their talk just before I did the keynote speak. And he said, come to my talk. And he worked for a big bank out there, a huge bank. And his talk was titled, How to Be Agile with a Backlog of 53,000 Requirements. And I'm like, does nobody see the irony in this? Who is managing that? And I thought to myself then, Right, let's just say that this is working. Let's just say, all right, fair enough, you're doing a good job, guys, 53,000 requirements. Wow, you've done some analysis, haven't you? And then we go to a show and tell, and we're doing a show and tell, and somebody's looking at that requirement, they go, that's really good, that's exactly what I wanted. But it'd be really, really good if it just did this instead, or if it did this as well. And you go, oh, great idea, let's write that down and put it on the backlog. Hang on, before you write that down, go back and check through the 53,000 requirements on the off chance that somebody thought about it 2 years ago. I mean, really, who gives a damn? It's either important now or it's not, isn't it? So, you know, these behaviours are how we break things down, and the patterns that and the things that we're doing. We're just substituting user stories and backlogs for requirements catalogues otherwise, aren't we? There's a whole reason why we call them user stories, and they're supposed to work within an agile context. So do break them down by, person, personas, users. You can break them down by CRUD. That's still functionality, isn't it? Create, read, update, delete. It's still functionality that people want. It might be that create and read is more important than update and delete initially. You can still function. You know, there's things like that. Even things like book and pay. Well, you could probably find a workaround for paying on a website before, but booking is essential, but you don't need to have payment there because they might be able to ring up and confirm. So there's all these little things that you can think about here. Scenarios. How many of you use scenarios? A lot of you. And there are different types of scenarios. There's user scenarios and there's usage scenarios. User scenarios we often refer to like use case scenarios, that sort of type of thing, or variants of that. Usage scenarios would be more along the lines of a particular instance. That's more your BDD sort of stuff. But do use those. You know, use those and then break those different ones down. Look and analyze them and break them down and go, actually, from that analysis, which part of these scenarios should I do first and which ones can I defer? So that's another way to break them down. In fact, you might break them down and then add some of these other elements to it. And has anyone played Good, Better, Best? Jeff Patton, again, I like Jeff Patton story mapping. I find this a great technique. If you've got a story map and you know what the constituent parts are, like, order comes in, take order, record order, all the way to invoicing, you could actually say what's good enough, what's just good enough in terms of receiving an order and the technology around that. And you go, I just need to do just what's good enough. And what would make that functionality better? That's the next release. And what would make it the best it can be? And that's further down. In fact, the best it can be might never get done. If we don't play good, better, best, and we over-engineer and we gold plate, and it's very easy to gold plate because you're very dedicated. Most people are dedicated to what they're doing, and if you're a developer, you want to do the best you can do. But you know what? Sometimes the business doesn't want to pay for that. So playing good, better, best enables them to prioritize what's just good enough in terms of a feature or a function or a story. I'm interchanging the words because everyone uses different language. And what would make it better and what would make it the best it could be. I just want to throw this slide in as well, managing the backlog, and this comes down to the 53,000 requirements. If you get a new backlog item, the first thing, and it's important, then you should split it. But just because that backlog item was a must-have, it was mandatory, doesn't mean the elements below it are. And I think we forget about that. When we split them out, you might find they actually go in different areas. And that's all part of why we split and why we refine. And it might be, that these ones never get done. That's really, really important. It's all about constant prioritization. It's not about prioritizing against the program or project high-level goal. It's about prioritizing with the thing you're trying to achieve now. And that's why these goals are really important, because if you don't have an iteration goal, you don't have a release goal, or you don't have a project goal, what are you prioritizing against? You can never get down to delivering something early that will be of value. So, good, better, best. Split stories so that value is still obvious. Think to yourself, how is that going to add value to the end user? How do I retain that value? And use the patterns to do that. Bad. Don't split stories, by the soul can't part. So this is where you shouldn't change things out in the lobby, right? Because I have no idea what that was supposed to say. Sorry? Oh, so I can, that's it. It doesn't make any sense. the so I can part of the user story. You should be breaking it by the I want to part of the story. From this angle, it looked like Spanish. I literally just changed that as well. You shouldn't do that. And ugly, don't split stories that don't need splitting, because then you end up with 53,000 requirements or stories in your backlog, and then you spend more time. Who's managing that? Right? Let's talk about waste for just a minute, because if you've got a backlog with more stories than you need, you've created inventory. That's a lean waste. If you create stories with more detail than you need now, you've over-processed it. Who's managing all of that? All that's going to happen is they go out of date. You know, and I was having a discussion with somebody just outside as well. If you've got stories in your backlog that are older than 6 months and they've never yet deemed to be important, ditch them. Well, for a start, they should be epics. They shouldn't be low-level stories, because you shouldn't have split them because they were never important. But, you know, just get rid of them. Important stuff always comes to the surface. Every time I've been on a project, there's always been something that's had to be changed last minute because we didn't think of it. Trying to leave no stone unturned doesn't help. Okay, just go with it and go, that's good enough. And the important stuff will always bubble to the surface, always. So one of the last things I want to talk about, and this is another bugbear of mine, is user stories and people's misunderstanding of non-functionals. How to incorporate NFRs into your backlog. You might know all of this stuff, you may not. I'm going to talk about it anyway. So functionality, what the system needs to do, its behavior, I think you're all familiar with that. Non-functionals, how well it does it. But if we look a little bit further into categories of non-functional, we have global non-functionals, and then we have associated non-functionals. Global non-functionals are things that are going to set constraints or limits on the project, on the technology, on the business. It might be you have to use a particular type of technology. It might be the budget. It might be particular operating systems or all sorts of technology things that you might constrain you. It could be service level agreements. Okay, this seems to be news for most people, but when, especially for business analysts, which irritates me a little bit, when they're capturing requirements, they seem to focus a lot on functionals. What happens to the product when the project finishes? They don't just die, do they? It's like everyone puts in all this energy for the 12 months of the project, and then the project finishes, and they forget that it's going to live on for probably another 20 years. It's got to be maintained, it's got to be supported. Which costs more? The project or the maintaining of the system for the 20, 30 years? Non-functionals actually help us think about those things. They're really, really important, and they need to be thought about. This isn't something you can just evolve as you go along. You're not going to get to the point where you're going to deliver some functionality and go, oh, damn, GDPR. You don't think about that. You sort of need to know that and build that in as you go, and you need to be thinking about it. But where do you put them? Because you're not going to have them on your Agile board, are you? Well, for instance, a global one, if you stick it on your Agile board and you put it into a sprint, when's it done? It's never done, is it? Because it has to go back. So what do you do? Keep moving it? So we need to think about how we need to manage these. Associated ones are what we call operational sort of type things that might be related to a functional requirement. And they could evolve over time, and we can leave those because they will evolve. And they make the functionality better. So those are sort of two categories. There might be another category that you can think of, but those are the two that I'm thinking of. So what do we do with them? Well, global ones, you do need to think about them up front. If you go back through the Scrum stuff about what is a backlog, it says work items, things that the team needs to work on to maximize value. It doesn't dictate what that format is. It doesn't say write them as user stories. In fact, if you look into a little bit more, it says in there that you should find necessary documentation to ensure that it's complete. Well, not complete, but you've got all of those things covered. If you have to write it in an Excel document, write it in an Excel document. It doesn't dictate the format. What I think is a good idea is for global NFRs to be placed somewhere on a board and just highlighted, like GDPR, something like that. Things that you know that are actual constraints. Somewhere else, they should be documented. So you're going to have them fully documented with all the rules around there that you'll need to pull out at some point in time. And you may end up adding some of those to definition of done. So they will constrain the work you're doing. Oh, it's like 10 minutes. 5, okay. I'm nearly So that will constrain it to definition of done, and that's quite good as well, because when you're doing your iterations or your sprints, you're looking at what definition of done means, and it might be documented, right? Documented so that somebody can maintain it afterwards. So it might be about coding standards and things like that that goes into there. So you can see them, but they don't move physically. They manifest themselves in different ways in your backlogs, mostly in definition of done. But when you're saying, what are we trying to do in this iteration, you go to this board and you say, which of these affects what we're trying to do in this iteration or release? When we talk about associated ones, well, they're all in the mix, really. They should go in with all the functional stuff. And, you know, confirmations are written as acceptance criteria, maybe written as BDD scenarios, you know, or other types of scenarios, but they should be mixed in with the functionality. They shouldn't be written as technical stories really on their own, because a technical story doesn't really add value. So I've no problem with having spikes, because that's testing, you know, a hypothesis. But a technical story that's there that you can't associate with some type of functionality would worry me, or you can't set as a standard under definition of done. So think about how you manage those stories. I once did a training course for a huge company, insurance company, and they said to me, all our requirements have to be user stories, and you will teach us all how to do it user stories. And I'm thinking, no, I won't. No, and I'm like, why? Because some manager who knows nothing about this has dictated that everything has to be in JIRA as a user story. Well, that's not helpful, because what that's forcing them to do is probably ignore the non-functionals, because they don't know how to manage them, and then you end up with low quality or unscalable products. I just threw this one in last minute, mainly because my husband said I should. The sum of the parts does not always equal the whole. If you're just testing the tasks, and you're not testing the acceptance criteria for the value, you're not done. Now that might seem like, well, of course it's not, but this is what happens. People think, because they've broken the story into tasks, and all the tasks are done, and they're all tested, then therefore all of the tasks can move into done, and the value is obtained. No, you still have to test the acceptance criteria of the value of the story. So my last slide, I timed this really well, I'm quite impressed. My last slide then, good, understand and capture global NFRs up front. I know there's a big thing about don't do upfront requirements, blah, 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 but some of them need to be done up front, that's okay. But don't write NFRs as user stories, they're not functional. User stories are stories for the user. I don't see users asking for non-functionals. They're things that we need to bring in for maintenance, for service level agreements, for quality characteristics. And ugly, don't just test the tasks, test the story in order to get the value. And that's it from me. Thank you.